Mac the Maker here with another video on working with 3D prints. This one is a bit bigger than my usual fare. This is a 1/1200 scale Klingon Negh'var warship. The model was, like a lot of mine, from, someday I'll even learn how to pronounce it right, Miletus Shipyards on DeviantArt, a 3DS file that I took and shelled a bit so the small details would be printable, and then split up in Windows 3D Builder. I did use some old filament I had laying around. That was probably not the best choice, as there is quite a bit of stringing going on here. That's okay. Since this wasn't a business print, I didn't want to use my good stuff, so we'll just have to make do. I already ran a heat gun over it once, but we'll go from there. So first thing we're going to do, and I'm not going to go too much over this, is removing supports. I use Simplify 3D as my slicer, primarily only now because I like how it does supports. There was a time when it was kind of the king of the slicers, but most of the free options out there, Kira Slicer, Prusa Slicer, have caught up to it, but I still think it supports the best. So your prints may look a little bit different, but I think the end result will still be the same. So to remove the supports, typically you shouldn't need a lot. There are little cutters that probably came with your printer. Sometimes maybe like a 90 degree pair of pliers to get in there. Very occasionally, if there's something real small, some tweezers. This, I kind of tried to lay it out to minimize supports wherever I could. And like, try to use the normal stuff here. And you can see these just, for the most part, peel away. I have to get a little hand torch to clean up this filament. Make sure I throw that stuff out too. You can see here, even though it was supported, I have a bit of spaghetti noodling going on down here. So I'm just going to clip that real quick. Maybe. This side, maybe even a little bit worse. I may not have gotten the supports right up to the overall structure there. On the bottom. So this area there were some supports, but it was a pretty tight area, and I knew it wouldn't be seen after the model was built. Down the bottom, you've got everything else going on. So I'm just going to kind of roughly go in with my hobby knife and try to chip away at it. You can also use it should be also my chisel blade, I think, which has seen better days. I'm just trying to get anything that's real loose off, and then I'll go in and hit it with like a file or something. So I'm trying to, so I have support here that goofy. other tool I forgot to mention are picks. And take the clipped one here. I can't tell if that's just a support or what, but it looks like it's probably, sounds like a support. Alright, so now that all the supports are removed, I think, you'll notice that I put some holes in for pinning. I actually designed 4 paper clips, but turns out I don't have any at my shop, so we'll use my regular kind of piano wire that's a huge pain in the butt to cut. But before we do that, one thing we have to do, and I'll try to limit most of this off screen so you don't get a reflection. We need to sand this and make sure all these are perfectly smooth. Especially judging after what this filament did with everything else, I wouldn't be surprised if there's any other weird issues going on here. So, sand all the mating surfaces. I use a piece of sandpaper on a mirror tile. I have extras of these for my printer beds, and they're straight enough for our purposes here. So, this is wet dry sandpaper, but I don't want to make too much of a mess. So, and then I'm going to just try to equally hold this. And then give it a good look and see kind of how bad we are. And it looks like a little bit of bowing in the middle. I don't even know if it'll be noticeable. It doesn't look like there's too big of gaps going on here. But anyways, I'll do more of this off camera, but do try to get this as even as possible. It'll save you work in the future. So once you've got your flat sanding down, you got everything pretty flat or pretty smooth to a point where you're happy with it, the next thing we need to do is scribe the surface. And I'm just going to kind of go along here real quick and draw some lines in with my hobby knife. And this is just to give your glue or your epoxy some tooth to stick to when you glue it together. Especially if it's like a surface that was on the build plate. If you use glass or a mirror or something, it may be really smooth even after sanding. And you press in enough to a little past the surface, so it gives a little better bonding than just a surface bond, even if it was maybe scuffed up a bit with some sandpaper. This guy here is, I'm gonna have to double check the picture, but I think he goes like that. And according to the video I watched on Trek Yards, this is supposed to be a separate like spaceship. That's not why I just disconnected it to make printing easier. But this is going to be a little interesting because there's not a real clear marking for this. It's going to be a bunch of like checking to make sure you don't go over too much, or you got the thing centered, and because a lot of this surface area isn't going to be used, I'm just going to kind of roughly scribe around it. And scribe some lines in there. Now some of these parts can be glued. Oh, can't forget the head assembly here. So I'm kind of impatient. I don't necessarily want to let these sit, so I'm just going to use some rubbing alcohol. Surfaces down here. I'm gonna where'd the other gun pot go? Oh, hold it up. I'm gonna go ahead and glue some of these flat surfaces here, the ones that maybe not have a lot of weight on them or anything like that. So I'm using my trusty Loctite gel of some sort. Black bottle I normally use, I didn't have, but this stuff is good enough. And yeah, you can see maybe some other extrusion going on from that. So apparently 10-month-old filament that was in my Illinois basement. Probably not the perfect choice for this. So again, we don't want this to ooze out. We do want enough to bond to the edge. So this stuff does set pretty quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and smear it all over itself so it sets even quicker. And it looks all pretty darn good. So there is the front. I might use something that doesn't set quite as fast this time. I'm going to go back to my old Hobby Lobby standby. I like the Loctite, it just sets too quick sometimes. And for this, we're going to need some extra time to make sure we get it aligned, because I don't want to have to reprint these. It looks pretty good. Alright. So we're going to go ahead and maybe Alright, one of the things I forgot to do when I was doing this file was add some holes to pin the head to the neck. I could just try epoxying, but I'm afraid that that will pop off a little bit too easy. To further complicate things, see the seam here? That's almost perfectly where I would pin to be in the middle there, and I don't necessarily want to work that close to the seam. I'm afraid it might break apart the two pieces. So I'm going to have to probably do two pins, one up here and one kind of down here. Of course, the fun part is getting them to match. I have never been horribly accurate at that, so I tend to go with a little bit bigger drill bit to allow me some wiggle room. So what I'm going to need, I'm going to erase all my little marks here, hopefully. And we're not perfectly, these two, if you remember, didn't glue on straight as it set before I could get the final finessing. But I'm going to go close enough here. Looks like 10, 11, 12, 13 millimeters, of course. So let's try to mark 6.5, shall we? I don't know if this ruler is going to. Let's try moving it a little bit just so I can hold on to it a little bit better. And this is so I got a slightly bigger drill bit that's from a different brand, and my more favorite pin vise went a lot quicker. So I'm not sure what's up with those drill bits, but they're not very good. I'm going back to paper clips simply because the piano wire is just too hard to cut. It's good for display stands and whatnot, but it's a little overkill for this stuff. So I'm gonna cut that bendy part off and cut another straight pin. Looks like the end got a little. And so since this isn't solid, there's infill in there. If you've not worked with 3D prints or seen a lot of 3D prints, there's usually a solid wall, a solid top, and a bottom, but the inside is made up of like a honeycomb layer, so you don't use as much plastic, but it still remains fairly strong. So once we get through that, it's about 0.8 millimeters thick wall back there, it's that honeycomb thing, so there's not a lot stopping this pin from going in, which does make this next part a little more difficult. So I just want to make sure and see kind of how aligned we are. Like I said, the larger drill bit should help give us some wiggle room. And hopefully, and actually it looks like that'll work. That'll give us some wiggle room. So the next step is a little more time sensitive. Have to do it all at once. So we use super glue to glue the pins in, and then epoxy around the edges, and then put everything together at the same time and hope it works. So I am going to pause for a minute while I get everything else ready. So I've already mixed up my batch of epoxy putty there really quick. I'm going to take some super glue here and just squeeze some out and grab my tweezers and hoping the thickness of the super glue will kind of hold him in place as we go. Okay. I'm going to actually trim him off a little bit real quick. Alright. And I'm going to dab a little bit on the edges of these, just so as they go in, they kind of smear. And then we're going to take our epoxy, and again, you want to get enough to bond, but you kind of don't want too much to like squeegee out. So, and these were all scuffed up and sanded and everything beforehand. So, alright, I'm going to take this, we're going to kind of put, oops, see these are, there we go, and we're going to try to make sure we get everything lined up here. And so there's some extra, but that's alright. And we're just going to hold it as well as we can. I'll try to get it on camera here, but. And then the hope is the super glue that is in the holes we drilled on the pins sets pretty quick. So we can let that go. And it's a little loose, but it still allows us to do some final adjustments here. Keep everything straight. I'm going to try to smear some of the epoxy putty off, maybe not. Alright, I'll just have to sand it off. Sometimes you can clean it up pretty quickly, but not if you have to hold it. And I'm just going to kind of look around, make sure all the gaps are even, straight, that sort of thing. And it feels like it's starting to set up, so. Now the cheat method is if you know there's an area that you're going to have to sand anyways and you don't want to hold it till it's set, you can like super glue a bead over the two and hit it with accelerator, and that'll hold it for you, kind of like a spot weld. And then once everything's set and you're getting ready to do finishing, you can come back and sand that off and whatnot. And sometimes it'll even be a step in the right direction because you've already filled a gap or whatever by doing that. So I might do that. You know what? Up here looks like I'm going to have a gap regardless, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to just smear a little bit on here and hit it with get it set right. And hit it with the accelerator. And then at least I have one part that's not going to move on me too much. So there, I think, famous last words, right? There, I think that'll be pretty good. We can just set it down. Maybe with that, just to make sure it doesn't tip over. And let the epoxy cure. I usually leave the epoxy that I used sitting there, so I kind of have a good idea when it's all cured and stuff. I can come back and play with it, and if it's hard, then I can go back to work. So, all right, now we just wait. All right, so the head of this is pretty dry. I'm not gonna shake it right now, and I've already cut my paperclip pins here and test fitted everything to make sure we had a good fit. So I am just going to real quick take each one of these out and get some super glue on the end and stick them back in. And we're going to go ahead and let them sit in there for a minute or two. And then I'm going to mix up a bit larger batch of JB Weld this time. Keep that from gooping out. Looks like finally just a little bit over here. And here. Right. And then I am going to take my thicker Loctite here, just like before, and put it just on the edges of the pins. As it kind of comes out all crazy. That might have been a little too much. I'll put some super glue. Now sometimes I will put some super glue between like the wider areas of epoxy. You don't want them to mix. I don't know. I'm assuming it won't cure if they mix. But if you're doing a really large area, it's beneficial because then you can hit it with the zip kicker and it helps make everything set up faster. And let's get promising. There we go. In this case, just that I already double checked everything. Putting the pins in, or the alignment holes in first, definitely helps with everything. And then I am going to rubber band this. So I'm going to move the rubber bands on, and then I'm just going to cinch them up here. And hopefully, there we go. now at least we definitely have something that looks like a Negh'var. Still too big to fit completely, oh, maybe just about into the camera frame. So parts that are left are this guy. I'm gonna go up there, and then the big disruptor cannons that go on the bottom here. And then again, I've got the holes already done for that, so these should be easy. This, I guess I designed some bigger pegs. I don't really remember that, but okay. So I'll get some pegs printed for that to put in there. So, all right, moving on.